right, Proverbs 25 tonight. Verse 1 says, "These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied." And so we have a little insight here as to who copied these Proverbs. I don't know if it's the next couple of chapters. But, we have two kings of the Bible mentioned here, so we know these are sayings of Solomon. We know that these are things that were passed down generation to generation, and it's good that they were kept, and nice that we got a little insight into that. So verse 2 says, "It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter." All right? So it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. So it's his right. There are some things that we probably won't know until we get to heaven. There will be more to learn, obviously, when we get there. But the other takeaway I get from this is that God sometimes conceals or doesn't immediately reveal to us, because the search kind of creates a desire in us. So if you ever get on a search for something, whether you're searching out a product that you want, nowadays we can go online if we want to buy something, and we can check out reviews on the product. We can see, where it's made, how it's made, how long it'll take to get here, and all of that. We have people who are able to now search out family histories and all of that, and there's a lot on that. And you guys know that Tracy likes to do our family history, our ancestry, and that kind of stuff. And man, she's got some lines of our family clear back to the 1400s. So, it's, you can just see when she gets on a trail onto something. When you get back that far, you're so far off of. You don't go back too many generations, and all of a sudden you've got direct lines, but they're going in different directions. You have multiple direct lines after that. So, she just likes wants to search, and the more she wants to find out. And it's the same with the Bible. I think at least I see that in me. The more I find out, the more I learn, the more I want to learn it. So God kind of not just saying, blah, here it all is, and now you can understand it all right away. That kind of holding, I hate to put it this way, holding back information, but just, I'm going to let you see this much. And I'm going to make you work or make you search for more. And that's kind of, I think, the idea here, the glory of a king or the kings is to search out a matter. So to spend that time and be diligent to dig into and chase down leads, in the Bible, do we, and if you teach from the Bible at whatever level, you're a Sunday school teacher or a small group leader or whatever, you've experienced that hopefully, where you're in a text and it reminds you of, or you have somebody else that you're reading or a commentary that you're reading that says, check these verses out, where you have parallel passages or you have other verses that go along with. We do that often, and that's part of the searching out, and quite frankly, it's part of the fun for me, is to see how a passage, without taking it out of context, biblical principle, but the verses they're using don't really apply to that, because in their context, they don't mean that. They don't have anything to do with that. It drives me crazy. With a little bit of extra study, you would find out. There are verses to back up what you're saying. Go find those. Don't just pick one and take it out of context and make it mean what you want it to. Anyways, verse 3. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of kings is unsearchable. So you think about, and even more so, we think that we can search out the heavens now. We have giant telescopes that orbit the earth that we try to use to look out beyond our solar system, We've sent satellites out that have left our solar system by now and send back pictures and all of that. All the things we've done to search out the heavens, and we've not, the earth for depth, you're just looking at the earth. But you think about our oceans, we have not searched the depths of our oceans. We don't know very much about what's at the bottom, the very depths of the oceans. We can't get down there. And if you ask anybody, the tallest mountain on the earth, everybody's going to say Mount Everest. But really, the tallest mountain is 2 miles. The peak of the tallest mountain is 2 miles below the surface of the ocean. I think the Pacific Ocean. That's really the tallest mountain on the earth. Is 2 miles. The peak of it is 2 miles below the surface of the ocean. I can't remember the name of the mountain. They have a name for it, but nobody ever throws that name out there. They always throw out Mount Everest because everybody thinks from the sea level up. They don't think about sea level or below sea level. But Solomon here is saying the heart of a king, or the heart of anybody, but the heart of a king is that unsearchable. And we have a lot of verses. Paul spends some time in 1 Corinthians talking about the heart of men and how, who can really know the depths of the heart of a man, what he can do, what he's capable of, except for the man and the spirit of the man, and obviously God. And I think he makes that point pretty clear. And that's, Solomon says it a lot faster than Paul did. Solomon takes one verse. Paul takes a couple chapters, I think, to try to explain it. But, just, and it's another thing to think about, how deep is one who's really willing to try to go deep. How deep can we really go? How much can we really understand? There are people who have done, and I would say are way more educated than me, which isn't hard to do since I just graduated high school, but they're a lot older than me, and they have these thoughts when they read verses out of the Bible, they read sections out of the Bible, and I'm like, they can apply physics and they can apply everything else to these verses, and I can understand what they're saying, but I don't think I could ever spit it back out the right way, or make it understandable to anybody else. Chuck Missler, right? He was really good for that. There's a couple people that are like that, and so a king, and he's using a small case, but so he's talking about men, but a king or somebody who's in a place of authority should be that kind of a person, should be somebody who's a thinker and not just somebody who reacts, right? And really thinks about things, not even just a casual thought toward decisions they make or guidance they give. They really should, dig into and think about different aspects and how decisions or directions are going to affect the people. And I hear a lot today with some of the decisions and some of the things that are being said and being made by those who are in leadership in our country and in other countries, and people usually follow up their comments toward them with what are they thinking, or they can't possibly be thinking. I'm thinking, no, they know exactly what they're doing. They have thought this out much more deeply than you realize. You assume by their comments that they're not considering what's going to happen, and they really have considered everything that's going to happen. There's a reason they're taking us in certain directions. They want to go in the directions we're going. They may say they don't, but they do. Verse 4, take away the dross from silver, and it will go to the silversmith for jewelry. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. And so just like just like a silversmith would remove the dross, heats it up till all the dross or the dirt and all the impurities kind of bubble up to the top of the silver, and then they scrape it off. And it makes it suitable for jewelry and other things. doing that is a king doing that with his administrators, with people who are going to be a part of his court in this case, or in our case would be maybe a part of the cabinet. You turn the heat up. This is the whole part of, or the whole reason for the process that we put cabinet members and some others through going before Congress and being confronted for things that they've said and things that they've done and all of that. All of that's to bring all that stuff up and see who's fit for the office that they're trying to be appointed to. So that's why we have the checks and balances. That's why it's good for that. Unfortunately, when you go the other way and you don't have that, what you end up with is a ruler who, like Hitler, becomes paranoid of his highest ranking officials and kills them. You know, the Caesars were the same way. The Herods were the same way. They didn't trust the people who were closest to them. You know, and so they did away with them. Well, that just makes for a wicked king. But a king who will test those who are giving him instruction, like Nebuchadnezzar did, and then the wicked are found out and taken out, and the righteous, the good, the just, like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God made them shine, right? He brought them up. And so Nebuchadnezzar was able to tell those who were just telling him what he wants to hear for their own benefit, and those who would tell him the truth for the good of the kingdom. And they were elevated. Verse 6 says, "Do not exalt yourself in the presence of the king, and do not stand in the place of the great. For it is better that he say to you, 'Come up here,' than that you should be put lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen." Right, so it would seem common sense to not just go in and assume that, you know, the person who's kind of the head of a banquet, maybe in this case, that you would just walk in and assume a position of honor and try to be able to sit as close to the king as you could. You would take a lower spot, because it's better to be moved up because you're in the wrong spot than to be put down because you're in the wrong spot. It's much more embarrassing for you. So don't exalt yourself. We shouldn't walk around thinking better of ourselves than we ought. That's not a popular thing, hasn't been for a long time in our culture. There's a lot being said about self-esteem. And this is exactly what Solomon is talking about. Don't esteem yourself. Even the Bible tells us not to esteem ourselves better than others. You know, that was another warning of Paul. You don't do that. You don't think of yourself as better than everyone else, because you could very well find out that you're in the wrong place, the wrong position. You shouldn't, in a place that you shouldn't be in. And, you know, you need to be taken down. And the problem is, when we promote self so much, then it's a pride thing, and we can't be humble and remove ourselves. We're going to be humiliated before we remove ourselves. And there's a certain football coach that's finding out about that this week. So, anyways, it's better. Verse 7 said, "For it's better that he say to you, 'Come up here.'" So, anyways, always better to do that. Take the lower position, and be elevated by the one who's giving honor. Verse 8: "Do not go hastily into to court, for what will you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame? Debate your case with your neighbor, and do not disclose the secret to another, lest he who hears it expose your shame and your reputation be ruined." All right, so you have an issue with a neighbor, with somebody else, you know, don't just run to court. Take care of it. It's better to settle it between two people outside of court, in private. You know, if apologies need to be made, then apologies are made, and should be accepted. If payments need to be, whatever the deal, whatever the outcome is, you try to negotiate that before you run to court, because courts are public. Even in our culture, courts are public. And and it'll come out. So try to bet your best to take care of it in-house and between neighbors, and then don't go and disclose the whole thing to somebody. You know, we don't need to go out and talk about it and brag about it or whatever. If you get some business, an issue taken care of with somebody, let it rest between the two of you. You don't have to go out and look what I did and look how I made this better. And well, if you do that, then you also got to say how you screwed it up to begin with, right? Well, how did it get there? Oh, well, it doesn't take much. It just takes a simple question. So I just said, just take care of things between people, between brothers, between neighbors, and keep everybody else out of it. Then you don't have to deal with backbiters. You don't have to deal with backstabbers. You don't need to deal with drama. It's just between the two of you. Get it taken care of, and preserve your reputation. Verse 11, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and settings of silver. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise rebuker to an obedient ear. All right, so somebody comes to you and they don't come with malice. They come with, hey, I want to talk to you about something. They want to give you some instruction. And that's a repetitive principle throughout the Proverbs. We've seen it over and over again to pay attention, whether it's child to parent or whether it's neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, whatever it is. Listen, see what they have to say, because good words, good instruction will improve you, right? I mean, I think that's the implication here. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and settings of silver. And so the idea there is an ornate, precious metal piece of work, something that's beautiful. So to have and to give or to receive a good word is good. And then the earring of gold kind of brings attention to the second part there in verse 12, to also listen. It's like an ornament of fine gold is a wise rebuker to an obedient ear. All right, so whatever side of that you find yourself on, whether you find yourself on the side of being the wise rebuker, make sure your instruction is wisdom and not reaction, but wisdom and thought out well. One that's got to receive, be obedient to it. Recognize the advice for what it is and the intention for what it is, and be obedient to that. And if change needs to be made, then receive that in humility and make the change. It'll be much better for you to have the shared wisdom then applied to your life, which is what we pray for every time we get in, especially into this book. It seems like I don't want to be repetitive about my prayer, but I feel like it seems right to ask not only for the wisdom to be able to draw wisdom out of this book, but to then be able to be wise enough to apply it to our lives. Verse 13, like the cold of snow in time of harvest, is a faithful messenger to those who send him, for he refreshes the soul of his masters. So the cooler air, the cooler weather in a time of harvest, after the heat of summer and the hard work that goes into getting the crops to harvest, to harvest time, to have that cooler air, the cooler weather, it's refreshing to have that, right? This is one of my favorite times of year because it's bringing relief from the heat. I don't like the heat of summer, and I never have, even as a kid. I didn't hole up in the house because we didn't have air conditioning one either. So we still went outside and just try to find as much shade as you can. Or, we had a pond back in the backside of our neighborhood that I grew up in. And so we were always down there and fishing and wading out in the pond and getting wet when we weren't supposed to, but it felt good, Or we were chasing each other with a hose or whatever we were doing all summer long. That was fun. But man, when the cooler weather came and, you didn't have to worry about trying to cool off. it was good. So this time of year, I like this time of year. The rains feel nice to me. The snow, the first snows that will come, I'm going to enjoy when most people won't. Everybody will start lamenting and complaining about winter, and we won't even be there yet. and I'm going to enjoy it. I like the cold, and the ground is a little hard because it's got a little bit of a freeze to it. And, you know, I'm like anybody else. By the time we get to February, I'm done driving in it. And, you know, now when I was younger, I didn't care. But now I just like, you know, Lord, we could warm it up a little bit. I'm not all bummed out about global warming. I'm really not. Little warmer, a little sooner. Not hot, just a little warmer. And I'm good. But I like the refreshing, cool air. All right, so then, in that being said, then a faithful messenger to those who send him is a refreshing thing. To be able to trust somebody with a message you're trying to send. And he refreshes the soul of his master. You know, so we don't necessarily understand practically master and servant except for our relationship with God. And so, you know, if we're faithful messengers of the one who has sent us, and we have been sent, we've been seeing that in the book of John very explicitly. I mean, even in 17, man, in John chapter 17, Jesus prays for those, you know, who are going to, well, for the 12 and for us, saying things like, I've taken them out of the world, or we've taken them out of the world, but now I'm sending them back in the world just as you sent me into the world. To think that to be an obedient messenger might be refreshing to God. How do you refresh God? I can't even imagine that anything I would do or say would be a refreshment to God, except for obedience. Seems to be something that he really takes great pleasure in. And so an obedient messenger, a faithful messenger, is a refreshment to God. I mean, we just deal on the surface with the evil of this world. He deals deeply with that. So to have his messengers be faithful makes sense that it would even bring refreshment to him, doesn't it? Verse 14, whoever falsely boasts of giving is like clouds and wind without rain. Whoever falsely boasts of giving. You think of Ananias and Sapphira right off the bat. That was my first thought in Acts. They go in, they've sold a piece of land, they only bring part of it, but they represent like it's the whole of the price, and look at what we're doing. And you know, Peter's response to that is, who put it in your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? And poop, dead they went, you know. They were dead. But a boaster, especially of giving, is like clouds and wind without rain. You know, to have the negative effects of a storm without the benefit of the land being watered by a good rain is, you know, just to bring. You have to deal with downed trees. You might have to deal with damage to your home, whatever. Just being in a windstorm is no fun. You know, when we were in California, we were in the high desert, and we got the Santa Ana winds and no rain. And it was hot wind. And, I mean, it's like being in a convection oven. It's just hot wind blowing all the time. And I remember coming back to our apartment the first time after we had just moved in. And I came home, and Tracy's outside washing the windows, and I get out of the car, and I'm kind of chuckling. She's just washing just as hard as she can. And our apartment faced the west. and I said, what you doing? Trying to wash these windows, and they won't come clean. I said, yeah, they're not going to either. She's like, what? I said, no, honey, that's sand-etched glass there now. The wind has etched that glass with the sands out here. And she's like, oh. She'd evidently been working on it for a while. She was quite disappointed by it. But, you know, it made our windows look dirty all the time. There was no cleaning it up because it was just all you had was the effects of the wind. You didn't have any, and you rarely had any rain that went with it. You could always tell somebody that was from back east or from the Midwest, because when the rain did come, we were all outside. Everybody from out there was inside, or they would be driving by looking at us, and we're out still cooking and grilling and whatever, just to have some relief from the rain. And they didn't understand that. Verse 15 says, by long forbearance a ruler is persuaded, and a gentle tongue breaks a bone. All right, so long forbearance, patience. You know, a ruler is persuaded by long patience. So presenting and being patient, not just continually bombarding somebody you're trying to get a decision from, but to be patient and let them think about and make the best decision, understanding that their decision doesn't just affect you, it may affect other people. And so to be patient with a leader who is truly taking time to try to make a decision, and it says here, your patience or your forbearance is a persuader, right? You'll bring them around to your conduct towards somebody you're trying to present a case before for whatever reason. Maybe you're trying to, get something fixed, or you're trying, whatever. To do that, if you're patient with them and you don't just start getting all impatient and speaking things you shouldn't be speaking, and saying things in ways that are demanding or whatever, but to conduct yourself well before somebody who can make a decision. That's a persuader. And a gentle tongue breaks a bone. Right? So to be gentle about the way you're speaking, not to be rough, not to start, standing your ground before you ever even need to. Why would you go to somebody who has the ability to make a decision in your favor, but be very demanding that it be done your way right now? We're seeing that in our Congress, in the way that it conducts itself. You have the squad, or whatever they call them, that are just ramrodding the House of Representatives, and they're demanding their way. And when they don't get their way, they literally are crying on the floor. I mean, I guess the president told them today, you're not going to get your $3.5 trillion deal that you're looking for. It's probably going to be more like one. So you got to decide, how's that going to look? What are you going to drop? What are you going to bring? I'm like, and I wasn't listening to a conservative news thing when I heard that. It was a pretty liberal one. So they're all disappointed too, but they're all lamenting that it seems to be the whole climate change agenda that's getting dropped. And, so there's promises of you're not going to do what we want, then we're not going to deal for you, and whatever else. And, they've gone to battle for themselves. And, some people have been complaining about the other side, the more conservative side, being too quiet. Well, maybe they're letting them break their own bones. Whatever. That's a lot of speculation. I didn't mean to get political on that. We can keep it in a personal sense, to be gentle. Listen, Romans 2:4 says that the goodness of God is what brings us to repentance. So let's just keep it on a personal level, and you think about what brought you to an understanding of your sin and brought you to repentance before God. It wasn't somebody demanding that you make a decision right now, most likely. Most likely what it was, at least for me, even as a kid, was to hear a sermon, to be convicted, to not go immediately, and then be even more convicted during the week and hope that I didn't die before next Sunday when I could go, and not realizing at a young age that I could just do it right there in my bedroom. I thought I needed to be at the altar at the church, and that's where I wanted to be anyways. But and I got there, obviously, but just that gentleness that actually brings the conviction and lets people see they're wrong. Verse 16, have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit. We've talked about, or I've talked to somebody about, I don't remember if it was here, about honey and its healing properties and how it is good for you, and to an extent. But even things that are good for you that are overindulged in will make you sick. They're not good for you. Too much sweets. How many times as a kid were you told by your parents, don't eat all the candy, it's going to make you sick? And I can't say that I ever reached that limit yet, but I can't say that I never tried that limit either. I've been, not happy with my overindulgence. It doesn't make me feel good. I haven't been to the point of throwing up either. So, but anyways, don't be a glutton. I have written there. And, you can tell by looking at me, I have my issues with consuming too much. Verse 17, seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. Now, most people probably don't really understand this, but there was a time, and I can remember a few neighbors, not all of our neighbors, but a few that we were close with, where, you might knock on the door as you're walking in, but they were usually expecting you. But, in a time when you knock on a door and a neighbor just say, hey, come in. It was friendly, and it was, not worried they weren't dodging you. And so basically just don't wear out your welcome, right? Don't just go walking into people's houses. You don't have to be there every day, all day, whatever it is. You don't have to be there too much. If you're pretty sure they're home and they're not answering the door, you probably ought to take a clue in that you've been there too much. So lessen the visits, the number of visits a little bit. Verse 18, a man who bears false witness against his neighbor is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. So false witness, a lie, lies inflict wounds, So to be that kind of person is like a club or a sword. You bludgeon or you cut, even a sharp arrow. If you're lying, maybe you don't think, I'm not saying this to their face. I'm over here. I'm not really going to hurt them. Well, a lie over here in the form of gossip is like slinging an arrow. It's like taking a long shot at them. So just, we don't want to do that. We don't want to be involved in that at all. A man who bears false witness against his neighbor. Oh, I already read that. Verse 19, that's where we're at. I got to start marking my verses again. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. Solomon has great ways to put these things. If you've ever had a toothache, that's what it's like to have confidence in an unfaithful person. It's just a nagging pain that won't go away. And a foot out of joint. Man, have you ever had a sprained ankle or whatever, and how hard it is to walk and get around with that? Somebody who is an unfaithful or a troublemaker or whatever, it's just a pain to deal with them all the time. Verse 20, like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, so is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. Well, let me say. You may have instances where you really want to be able to give, and your intention is to be encouraging. But you got to recognize when it's better to just not say anything. And somebody who's in the middle of sorrow, somebody who's in the middle of mourning especially, or in the middle of a hard time, it's better to not try to address that, to try to put your opinion on it, to always try to give your wisdom. Just be there. Because most often people like that are being bombarded with, and most of it probably with good intent, but being bombarded with sayings, with, whatever. Even favorite Bible verses, if they already know them, then trust that the Lord's already put them on their heart. And just pray for them. And a simple "I'm praying for you" is usually better than, hey, how you feeling? How you doing? I mean, you already know they're not doing well and they're not feeling okay. Do you really want them to unload on you? And because if you're at a certain point in the line of people who have come and said, "How you doing? How you feeling?" sooner or later, you're going to be the one that catches it, So if you're not ready for it, don't say things. We've probably all been there. And no matter, and it could be anything, right? It could be a loss. It could be my own stupid decision that I'm trying to recover from, whatever, If you have if your words are not well received or they seem to just kind of blow you off, it's because, you're kind of making them feel like you just yanked their coat off in the middle of a snowstorm. It's not helping. You're not helping. Or you're dumping vinegar on the soda and now it's just boiling all over the place. Just better to just let the heavy-hearted alone for a little while, and not. You don't want to not be seen, because then that goes the other direction. I don't mean to address something that he's not addressing here, but people want to know you care. But they don't always want to know what you have to say, especially not in the heat of it. 21, verse 21 says, "If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you." So, in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says similar things, right? About how to deal with your enemy, to pray for those who spitefully use you and that kind of thing, to feed them, to clothe them, and in doing so, you heap coals of fire on their head. And I've always heard that preached as its judgment, basically. You're doing a good thing toward a person who hates you, and you're just heaping conviction on them. Well, that doesn't really help with the intent of the person who is doing the good. Because now I'm doing good to try to inflict. And that's not really the spirit of what's being said here, I guess. I listened to J.D. Farag on this, and he's from the Middle East. And he even said he had just learned this not too long before he had taught on this. And he said, literally, when you're going to feed somebody, you would take, if you gave them hot coals, you gave them the ability to be warm, you gave them the ability to cook their food and feed themselves, and you were doing a good thing to heap the coals and give them the coals of fire. You were doing a good thing. Those kind of things that bring comfort help the mind. It helps them to be able to sort out what they're angry about or what they're not angry about. It helps them to see more clearly. If their basic needs are being met, it's not that you're heaping conviction on them, it's that you're helping them to actually clear their mind. And that, in that culture, is really what that means. It's not the way we would take it in our culture. Our culture is we still have this kind of revenge, but that doesn't go along with what the Bible teaches, does it? Vengeance is God's to deal out, not ours. Ours is to give comfort and to be at peace as much as it depends upon us and that kind of thing. And so to give them the ability to meet those basic needs, to stay warm at night, to be able to cook food so they can have their stomach full, all of that helps people to think more clearly. It keeps them from dwelling on their circumstances as much. Obviously they're still going to have to deal with the circumstance of not having, but if you can do that, you're actually really helping. You're not causing conflict by doing that, or conviction. Conviction is not ours to do. And then, so the Lord will reward you. What did Jesus do on the cross? the words that he spoke, especially the words of forgiveness. Did he speak those so they would be more guilty? No, he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. I think he meant exactly what he said. He didn't do that. He didn't offer forgiveness or call for forgiveness for those who were against him so that they could have more conviction on them. So it makes sense what he's saying. And it was kind of one of those, that's another one of those, you go back to verse 2, and the glory of a king is to search out a matter, to learn something new is good. And it gives a deeper meaning to what's being said here, and not just a surfacey American way of saying, yeah, you want to make them feel bad? Do good to them. That doesn't make any sense. That the motive is wrong, and you're convicting yourself by your motive. Verse 23, the north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, angry countenance. So there you have the north wind that brings the rain. That's a cold rain. When you feel the wind coming out of the north and it's raining, you almost wish it was snow. It would just be a few more degrees colder. It would be snow, and this wouldn't hurt so much. Because to be wet and cold is no fun. That's much more miserable, right? And so they did. Again, a backbiting tongue brings an angry countenance. So what are we to people? Are we backbiting? Are we being that dreary, that cold, or that thing that causes misery? Or are we going to be different than that? Are we going to bring warmth, and are we going to bring relief to people? Verse 24, it is better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman. Well, that's a pretty popular proverb, and kind of been waiting for that one to come along. A couple chapters back, we actually dealt with very similar things, so we're not going to dwell on it too long. But, you hear that quoted often, and really, I mean, I get the analogy there, but and it is, I'm going to say it's a direct word to wives, and that goes back to your wrestling with the curse from the garden. You're going to desire your husband's position, and it's just easier. Can't tell you how many times when I was in high school, when I would grab my little brother and say, we gotta go. Because I had my mom and my two sisters in the house. And, there were times when it just wasn't going our way. And it was better for us to go hide somewhere than it was to be in the house. And, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I just, my brother should be thankful that he survived when he did. And, anyhow, sometimes retreat is the better part of valor. I think somebody said. So, anyhow, while it is a direct, I was starting down this road here, let me finish that up. It's a direct word to wives for sure. But a contentious person, period, is, you want to see people run in a workplace or even in a church. Let the contentious person walk through the door. All of a sudden, everybody's got something to do. Right? You're going to dodge the boss. You're going to dodge whoever it is, whoever the pot stirrer is, or whoever the one is going to cause trouble. You're going to stay clear of them. And so in a broad sense, it applies to everybody. All right, so verse 25. As cold water is to a weary soul, so is good news from a far country. So if you're waiting on news from a long ways away, it's refreshing to finally get the news. The thought crossed my mind when Facebook was down that there was a real possibility, depending on how long it was going to be down, that Hannah and Andy wouldn't be able to communicate. And even if they did, you know, you could say, well, they could always write letters, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah, you're going back to World War II time for somebody to write a letter to go across the ocean, you know, whatever. So depending on how far down that went, it would be harder for them to communicate than everything is, right. Well, and that's how they did. It was they went to email for the day. But, you know, that's still, it still takes longer by seconds, I understand, but it's a little more involved for whatever reason. We think it's not as easy as instant message, but whatever. And it wasn't that it didn't break down that far, because they do have email and that kind of stuff. But it was just, you know, what happened if the entire internet crashed for a while? You know, all of a sudden people are very isolated. And my first thought was, and this is what happens in Iran when they start saying things and doing things and they don't want the public to know and they don't want word to get it out of a country, they shut down the internet so nobody can communicate.
Well, even if the satellites go down,
Yeah.
that would even shut down cell phones and the whole world.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, it's a thing, but anyways, back to the verse. It's a little more understandable to be in that position where they would wait days and days, maybe months. I mean, it's really not that far back. My grandparents' generation, you know, World War II and before that, you might be months or weeks before you got a letter from mom and dad or from, you know, grandma. If they were missionaries didn't communicate back home like they do now. You know, you think about how we could get an update any day from a missionary, or from you know, I've got a second cousin who's a missionary in Belize. I can get daily updates from him. But I can remember before all of this, before all the internet and everything, my family on my grandma's side did. It's like I don't know if they called them chain letters or what they did, but you got an envelope and it might have, you know, 4 or 5 different families' update letters in that envelope. So you'd have 4 or 5 letters to read, and then you'd take yours out and put a new one in there for yourself, and then send them on to the next person. And they had an order that they went around to. So every few months, you know, you got this letter, this little envelope full of letters that you would go through and read the family updates, and that's what they did. You know, now that generation, a lot of that generation came from a time when phones weren't in necessarily everybody's house when they grew up, you know. And because I thought, well, you guys just pick up a phone and call each other. Kind of like, you know, why don't they just email? It's, you know.
I remember when we didn't have a phone in the house, we could run across the driveway to Grandma's house and have a phone.
Yeah.
And I had an aunt that she didn't have a phone, but her oldest son had it, and they had 2 of them, the old ones.
That cranked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you talk into it like they used to have on the programs.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, if Lottie needed something, she'd call them, and then they'd get on their phone.
Yeah, pass it down the line. Yeah. Now, when I was in high school, we had a party line, so you had to listen for your rings. You know, was it 2 rings? Was it a double ring, or was it just 1 ring? And so every few seconds, you'd get your ring.
Well, we had a party line, but if it rang, it was our phone. But
Yeah.
there wasn't a difference in ring. But
And then you know.
anybody on the line could hear you.
Exactly. Yeah. And if they got on the line and didn't want to get off, you weren't getting your phone call through, or you weren't going to be able to use your line. Yeah. Yep. So, but anyways, that long-awaited news from a distant person is refreshing, is basically the idea there. To find out everybody's okay. Verse 26 says, a righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring in a polluted well. And so, even somebody who has a good reputation, I mean, I don't think this is necessarily somebody who's trying to fool everybody. This is somebody who has been solid, but has some kind of falter in his witness. He's compromised the witness somehow. And it blurs the right and wrong to those who are around, those who aren't Christians. It makes everything convoluted, and all of a sudden they act like they don't know what's right and wrong, and it's your fault. So it's incumbent upon us to make good decisions, especially in the public, and especially nowadays. There's cameras everywhere. If you are of any importance at all, you better be careful what you say, and you better be careful what you do, because you can't hide from anybody anymore. It is not good to eat much honey. There it is again. So to seek one's own glory is not glory. So again, to eat too much of the candy, too much of the sweets will make you sick. It's not good for you. It's the same way to seek your own glory. And so again, in a culture where it's all self-esteem and self-awareness and self-this and self-that, one thing, the one self-term that we leave out most of all, and we want to avoid, is self-control. So, but to self-promote all the time, to seek glory, to seek attention, it's not good. It's not. You don't really want all that attention. For one, either you can never get enough, or you're going to eventually get attention you don't want. And in verse 28, whoever has no rule over his own spirit, and that's where the self-control comes in. Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. So listen, self-control protects. To be self-controlled, to not just go chasing every whim and every desire you have and let your guard down. When you do that, it's like a city that has no walls, that has no protection. You don't have any protection. If you're going to be self-indulgent all the time, do whatever you want. Again, there's that football coach, NFL coach, who's in a lot of trouble because he did that this last weekend. He let his guard down. He was in play, and his apologies sound pretty hollow to me, but he let his guard down. He said he was in places he shouldn't have been. He should have left. You should have left. You should have never been there before. Period. But whatever. And it's funny because you see a lot of people who think he's a good guy because he's won a lot of games, and so he's been a very successful person. And so he must really be a good guy, and this is just one bad thing. Well, then more videos from the past have started surfacing, and you find out he's not really all that great of a guy. So, but again, when you want to overindulge in things and you want to put your desires ahead of wisdom, you're letting your guard down, you're not protecting yourself, and you're going to find yourself in trouble. So, all right, let's stop there. We finished up 25, and we'll pick up 26, Lord willing, next week. Let's pray. Father, thank you again for your word, and Lord, for the pictures that Solomon has given. And while there's great wisdom in here, there's also been kind of entertaining to see how he likens different aspects of life to different analogies, and that's good. And Lord, I thank you for putting in our hearts the desire to know your word and to search out your truth, and Lord, to reveal it to us as we go, and not just all at once, but to keep bringing us along and showing us that there's more and more to uncover. We thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.